One of the areas, and I was a volunteer for a long time in animal welfare, and I kind of popped around. And what I wanted to do was, my goal was to work in a community to try to stop animals from being put to death in shelters. Now, you would think that might be the goal for a lot, but I will tell you, a lot of the organizations that I would volunteer for didn't have a mission. So I said, well, what do we do? And they're like, oh, we save dogs. And I said, okay, so, but we didn't have goals, we didn't have, how are we saving dogs, how do we want to do this? Some of them just said, there was an organization that really just kind of waited for opportunities, and then we popped and did those. So Shorty is my dog, will be walking around, hopefully won't be too distracting. But one of the things that called to me is I wanted to find an organization that fit what I wanted to do. I was giving my own time. As you guys, most of you are volunteers, probably. How many actually of you are volunteers? Wow. How many of you guys are staff members? Wow, so it's a pretty even split. Okay, cool. So I wanted to make sure I was fulfilling what I was looking for in the time, after my 40 or 50 hours of regular work, that it was going to be worth my while. And as an organization, it could be, I just want to save dogs. I want to save elderly pit bulls, and I want to save elderly pit bulls from the shelter. And you can get and call to people that have that same kind of mission. Or I want to save feral cats out of a shelter and work on that. So, hey, I'm a cat person, I'm a feral cat person, that's my mission, that's my drive. Because if you get people that share that mission and that drive for you, oops, I'm going the wrong way, you're going to have people that are aligned, right? And you guys are all looking and working to do the same thing, and that's kind of where it starts. So it has to start from the top. What do we want to do? And does it share? Is the value system shared with everybody in the group? And is that communicated well? And I'm not going to get too into these fancy buzzwords, but I do want to talk about strategies and tactics. You got to have strategies for anything you do, and even if you don't call them strategies, you have them. So I am Marc's elderly pit bull rescue, and I save animals from, senior pit bulls from the shelter. I have to have a way to do that, right? I sign up, I'm going to sign up, I'm going to be an approved partner. I'm going to, all of those things are strategies. So what we need to get to what we want. So we can't save pit bulls until the shelter recognizes us most of the time as a approved group. And usually what that means is they want to make sure that we're legitimate, that we, a lot of times when I worked in Philly, our groups had to be no-kill. They weren't going to take our animals and then put them to sleep because we don't need that kind of help. We need help getting these animals into homes. And tactics are all the specific actions and programs and projects and initiatives, and we do mobile adoptions, and we're going to do, we're going to sit at the mall in Christmas, and we're going to let people know about what we're doing. But also tactics, you guys, are the people that we bring on. And that's what we're going to talk about a lot with the team members, right? How many of you guys grew up playing sports? That's a really bad question to ask in an animal welfare conference at times. How many of you guys have worked, some of you guys are probably accountants, right, or work in finance. There you go, got one in the back. Just think about it, you guys. Most professions or most organizations that are trying to do and accomplish something as a team, if you're in the finance world, for instance, you have somebody who does payroll, you have somebody who does what they call accounts payable, so who we owe money to, accounts receivable, who owes us money, and you have all these different team members that all work together to get something accomplished, and that would be, the finance goals of what your organization is. If you're a baseball team, and if you have any understanding of baseball, you have all these little positions. There's 9 positions around the diamond, right? So you have to have all these different people who are playing their positions to catch the ball, if the ball comes to them, to throw to this specific person they're supposed to, but they all know what their job is. You have the pitcher who's, throwing the ball out. You have the catcher who's receiving it. If everybody was the catcher, you're not going to win the game. And the same thing when you're trying to do something like making a community like Los Angeles, specifically no-kill, you need a lot of star players to play their positions. And if you're talking about your own separate rescue group, it's the same thing. If you have everybody who wants to go to the facility and take the dogs, right? And nobody else who wants to try to work on social media, right, to help them get out, to actually do the adoptions, to organize the adoption events. You're going to need so many different aspects of what you do that doesn't always mean I'm the one that goes to the shelter and gets the old dog. And then you can also, we'll talk about self-awareness and whether or not you should be the person going to the shelter and getting the old dog, right? Because a lot of it, too, is somebody who is a founder of that rescue group, or if you're a staff member, right, and you're a manager, you have to try to set people up for success. And sometimes they'll be completely receptive to that and say, you know what, I know I can't be in there. I'll cry. You know, I'll raise a fit. I'll start throwing punches at the staff in there because all of these animals that are there, and we're like, yeah, you're probably not going to be the best representative for us because we do want to go back there. But sometimes you'll be like, no, you know, sometimes it's not as easy as that. So this is kind of the team analogy, right? And you need all your different players to win. So if you're good with the books, right, and you're pretty good with money and you're pretty good with finance, she's going to be just as valuable to you in keeping track of where your money is going in and out because, again, all of us, staff or volunteers, are relying on people to pay us donations. And more in this day and age, and I'm a donor and probably many of you are as well, we want to know our money's going to what we intend it to go for. And we want you to be able to utilize those resources for best impact, right? So be it staff and volunteers, all of these things are tactics, right? So if you want this rescue to be successful and this rescue to save 50 pit bulls this year from the shelter system, you're going to need adoption support, you're going to need potential donor support, and whether that is just somebody who is writing back a follow-up to your new adopters, because that's probably your first donor base, to say, hey, hope everything's going well. Let me tell you a little bit more about what we do and what our goal is and what our mission is. You know, to people that you're going to have board meetings, right? If you're a 501c3, you can't exist without some semblance of a board and who's governing your decisions. And you're going to ultimately want to do things like fundraise, you know, even if it's small things, like, you know, you're setting up something at a bar and they're giving you a percentage back. Somebody has to organize that. If you're going to do a gala, you have to have multiple people that are trying to find things to put up for people to bid on to give you money at a gala. There's so many different players that you need ultimately to fill your team. All right. I'm a big believer in job descriptions, and I'm a big believer in job descriptions that are well thought out. And this goes for volunteers especially. I'm a volunteer. I want to know what you want from me. And no offense, I don't want to be made to feel like, great, you want me as a volunteer, and then I'm in this abyss of I don't know what I'm doing with you. And that happens a lot because we're very, very busy. And when I talk to fellow rescue groups in Los Angeles with me, it's, well, I'm too busy saving dogs, or I'm too busy saving cats. And there's legitimacy to that statement. However, that's not a good long-term way of thinking if you really want the help. Because if you want to run yourself into the ground, keep up with that mantra. And sometimes you need to take a quick step back, and it doesn't mean, well, let's take 2 months, because animals are dying every day. But you also need to think about what you want, what you need, and that's hard to do sometimes. Okay, so I need a mobile adoption person because I need to do off-site events. I don't have a shelter, or even if I do have a shelter, I don't have enough people coming into my shelter, so I need to get out to the community to do more of that. Okay, so if it's a person, what are they going to need to do? What kind of person do I need in this? You know, you probably don't want the people that are going to set up the table, that are going to sit there and they're going to wait for people to come to them, right? You probably want something that's a little bit more outgoing that really would capture and say, hey, I know you're going into Walmart, but what, you know, look at this little kitty, you know, over here, things like that. So you really just need to think about, but not every job wants that person, right? So job descriptions are really good, and it starts with a good way of communicating to your team members, be it volunteers or staff members, of what their expectations are. If you're a manager and you have a staff person, that is the best and most basic form of this is what you do. This is your job. And you don't want to list every single thing that they'll ever do. Write their primary duties and then that special, other assignments as assigned, I think is probably a good way to do it. But with volunteers as well, and best friends, we have volunteer job descriptions because we want them to understand what they're signing up for and what the expectation is. And sometimes it has an hour benefit, like, hey, we're going to need you at least 1 week and a month for this many hours, or those kind of things, to be a mobile adoptions volunteer. And you guys, we will have plenty of time for questions after, so if you start coming up with these, just kind of write them down or something, and we'll address it afterwards, okay? Your values are big. Your values are big. And the next thing that I'm going to talk about, we're going to talk about open-ended adoptions a lot, and that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And the fact of the matter is, There's a lot of different groups that have a lot of different philosophies about things, and that doesn't make anybody right or wrong, okay? It's important for me, I'm a big proponent of open adoptions to help people understand why we do open adoptions. However, if you run a small rescue group and you said, I'm sorry, I hear you about home checks, but I don't feel comfortable not doing home checks, right? I'm not saying that's you, but we're just going to pretend. Doesn't make her wrong, it's okay. As long as she can understand where I'm coming from, where she's coming from, maybe she's going to play a part in this whole no-kill thing. I just think you guys need to understand that in any community, Austin's a good example of this, somebody's going to have to play the high-volume adoptions role. But the worst thing that we can do is start beating each other down because I'm right, you're wrong, red shirts are good, blue shirts are bad kind of thing, and that's what we don't want to get into. So if Claudette came to me and for some reason we and I were talking and she said, I just can't get behind this, I would say, I got it. I want you to save animals. So, hey, why don't we go to this person's cat rescue? They do home checks, their value system is shared, right? Because what happens is if I bring Claudette and I don't care, she's going to always have this kind of, I don't know if I can get behind this, and that could come out in the way she talks about the organization, her value, and when she's spending time with me. And again, it doesn't make her wrong, but I'm going to give her an option to go somewhere else that will fulfill her value system a little bit more. And maybe Claudette or I will change in 5 years and we'll be where we are before, but it's a way to continue to address and acknowledge, I understand where you're coming from, I don't agree with you, but please, we need people to save animals. And that's really the underlying issue. For you staff members, make this position a priority, right? If you don't have, you're running a kennel and you're supposed to have 7 people and you have 4, it's hard. And you're paying overtime generally, or you're running people down. If you work for large organizations like Best Friends, it could take a little time before you get a staff member in. For smaller rescues, and where I worked when I was in Reno, I could get somebody in the next day, which was also a dual issue for me, because sometimes we wanted the warm body, and it was just easy, like, you're the first person in, perfect timing, come on up, let's get you in and let's get you going. And sometimes that would work out, but again, just trying to see a pool out there, taking a little time to try to find the right person to match the value system, to match what you need in that job description. And it's not just the primary duties, you guys. So for instance, I'll give you an example. When I left Colorado, my first shelter, I took a job as a shelter manager in Reno. And what I found when I was in Colorado was some of the most difficult, both volunteers, but especially staff members that I had, were people that had a long-standing animal welfare experience. And that's what most people went for in my position as a manager, right? And the reason being is they knew everything. They're done. They got it. I've done this for 13 years. This no-kill thing isn't going to happen, but, hey, whatever, come on, I need a job, so let's do this. And I'm like, yeah, that's red flag. We're not going to hire you. So I thought about the position, and I said, okay, so obviously you do need somebody that can be comfortable around dogs and cats, somebody that can learn, right? But I needed somebody that could walk and chew gum, That's really what I needed. And I came up when I was in college as a bartender, and I worked in food and beverage. And I said, to be a waiter or to be a bartender, you're constantly doing things, you're starting and stopping, you're running around. So I started looking for people with that background, and what I would do is just get them in to see if they innately had a fear of animals, because some of them do. And then obviously if they innately had a fear of animals, it wasn't going to work. But a lot of them grew up with animals. They never worked in the industry, as I hadn't at that time. Probably I would only been in the business for a year and a half, 2 years. And it was really successful, And it was literally go in and say, hey, I want to take this dog for a walk, or I want you to go in here, I want you to go and groom this cat, or I want you to put this cat in this box, I'm going to show you really quick, then you're going to do it, kind of thing, just to see if they had the basic, because animals pick up, obviously, on the energy. So if you have somebody who's terrified of a dog, you're going to probably have issues. And that's all it took. But I understood, so it wasn't really, didn't have the experience that were on the primary functions. But when you went to the qualifications, somebody that can act fast, somebody that is quick on their feet, somebody that can balance 2 things at once. It's good for the volunteer force too, you guys. You guys are constantly answering emails, you're constantly going up, you're running around, you're grabbing stuff. You need somebody that can do that, so it just really worked out well. A lot of people have different ways about doing job descriptions. Again, like I'll repeat, I don't feel that they should be War and Peace, in every single thing they'll ever do. Really, if you're a mobile adoptions person, you're going to interact with the public, right? You need to be able to transport animals off and on. There's going to probably be some lifting. There's going to be weather. If you're in Austin in the summer, it's probably going to be pretty hot. There can be some cold days. There can be some those kind of things. So it's basically getting down to the basics, and not overwhelming somebody who's going to take potentially a cat caregiver position with you and having them read through 4 things of primary functions. Might not be what you're looking for. Again, other duties is assigned. It can catch, some of the other things that you need. And the same thing with the volunteer force, even more so. Give them a few of the primary functions that they're looking for, but they don't, 5, 6 maybe. Qualifications, and some of us in our rescue groups, you're going to be doing 10 things. We don't have just mobile adoption coordinators. So if that's what it is, then that's what it is. But if you can start to bring more people in that can specialize in specific things that you're doing, just work towards it. Because you're going to have somebody that's like, oh my God, that person is so friendly, they annoy me. And that's the person you want doing your adoptions. If I'm like in an interview and I'm like, they're so nice, I want to, hit my head against the table. I'm like, I'm hiring that person for adoptions. It's just not my thing, but I recognize that's something that, on a right-away basis is somebody that might catch your people that are trying to adopt your animals. Everything else we've kind of talked about here. So it's a reference point for a volunteer, and it's a reference point for your staff members to what you're asking them to do. Again, it should be a priority. The worst thing that you guys can do, we're really busy. We have a lot of stuff going on, but if you're a rescue group that you need volunteers, you need volunteers. The more volunteers you have, the more you can accomplish. You have to prioritize that. If you're a staff member, again, going back to the analogy of supposed to have 7 people, I have 4 people in my kennel. Until I get 7 people in my kennel, I'm going to have continuous issues every day. It's got to be a priority, and it's time consuming, and I know what it feels like when you're like, oh, I could be at the shelter saving more dogs right now. You're going to save more dogs in the long run if you can get your staff and get your volunteers that you need to help support your missions. Working interviews are good, and that's including volunteers. Have them come with you on an event. If you're going to hire them on an event, put them to work and say, let's see how it goes. And again, if it doesn't go well, we'll talk about ways to kind of help people who don't have self-awareness. It's hard, but it happens. We'll have people that want to walk the biggest and baddest dogs in the world, and I'm like, dude, you can't do it. And how do you tell somebody, like, I know you think you can do this, but you can't do it. It's hard. Single or panel interviews, I don't really have a preference, but a lot of times if you're sitting down and you want to bring in some new volunteers, they're going to do something important to you, you're going to bring in a staff member. I've always been a big proponent on single because I feel like if you have 3 people up there, it kind of becomes, somebody is directing generally those interview processes, but if it works for you, that's cool. I like single interviews. I like having, even if they're, if I'm looking for somebody that's going to lead a program, mobile adoption coordinator, volunteer, or something like that, I'll have a couple people talk to them just to get some feedback. I think that that's helpful rather than everything, and it helps build your accountability, and not that to get somebody in trouble, but you get buy-in from other people. And if you're a small rescue group and there's 3 of you that are founders, it's good to try to do that because you don't want, Millie said she liked this person, so we're going with her. I don't like her. I think she's terrible for this job. That kind of stuff is really cancerous. So it kind of helps with that as well. This interview processes, it's really important, though, that you establish how it's going to work. So if I'm a staff member, I oversee everything that happens in LA for Best Friends as far as like animal stuff, right? Where we pull animals, where we adopt animals, the coalition and those kind of things. I don't make decisions for the people that work under me that have staff members because I want them to be responsible for that. I want to provide feedback to them, but I wouldn't be a very productive boss or let somebody learn or develop if I didn't give them the tools to be able to make decisions of their own teams. And even within volunteer forces, it's good. So I would say, okay, we're going to set it up. I'm going to do an interview, and you're going to do an interview. You're the decision maker, so ultimately I think it's important for you to make sure that the person you're speaking with knows that you're the decision maker and that I'm here for feedback, and to help you make this decision. And leave it at that. But it's always helpful, and it's helpful to get other points of view, and especially if that other person is a little different from you and sees the world in a different way, that could be beneficial. You just have to be open-minded to taking it all in when making that decision. So then you got them hired, right? So you got through the interview process, you have your job description, you have a couple people in, you make your decision, and you bring the person in. That's generally, most groups or most people I see can do that part semi-well, right? We can identify we need volunteers, we need volunteers, we need volunteers, we need volunteers. Once we get volunteers, they fall into an abyss of who knows, okay, I'll go walk a dog, or and everybody's too busy. And from a volunteer perspective, a lot of times that's like, well, do they really need me? I don't really feel very valued here, and that's the tough thing. So it's, again, you guys, there's not an easy out. There's not like a diet pill, we're going to lose 50 pounds in 2 days. It's not that kind of thing. It takes work and it takes organization. So if you're doing mobile groups, if you're an advocacy group that goes and speaks in front of city council or those kind of things, an orientation, and I don't care if you're a rescue group or if you're best friends, you need some type of orientation to help people understand what you're doing, right? And how you do things, and who makes decisions, and who's, hierarchy, things like that, so people can just get a balance of what's going on here. Okay, this is this person, that's what they handle. This is what this person does, that's what they handle. And those are kind of things that orientations are good for. Giving them kind of the lay of the land. Don't go too crazy. Don't do 3-hour orientations. People will only retain so much. So you want to be poignant and start with just an introduction to who you are as a group or an organization. Values are a good, obviously, point to start off with. You need people that share your values or can understand and back your values first and foremost. You want the right people on the bus. Doesn't make them bad people, doesn't make you a bad person. But if you have people that are fundamentally don't agree with what you're doing, that person, it's just not going to be a good marriage, a good relationship. For staff members, it's a good time to review handbook stuff. So if you have somebody that's constantly and you're continually firing people because they can't get to work on time, maybe it's time to point out to them that, hey, we really value people that show up when they're supposed to and they come in. So make sure you guys, this is what we do. This is how you call out. This is how many times you can call out, those kind of things. Because those are times where you can see things. Or when people are just like, I don't understand how the vacation policy works. Maybe it's good to follow through on that. Same thing with the groups. If you guys have volunteers and you're like, hey, can you guys let us know, within a day, as much as you can if something comes up, that you can't do this so we can follow through on it. Any of those kind of things that you might struggle with, that you might just want to point out and review on how you want to see things communicated to you, if they need to not be there or, whatever it might be. And this says organization, but this goes for any group. This goes for a softball team. This goes for your bowling league. This goes for your rescue group. Or it obviously goes for you that work in organizations. Everything kind of feeds off each other. So if you look at this, actually I have a pointer. I'm not used to fancy stuff, so this is really cool. So if you look at this, this is what I'm talking about with mission. Leadership. This is what I want from you. This is what, this is what we do. This is, all of that. Vision, priorities, and the team of leaderships that start the value system down. Because when you have systemic issues, it usually starts from the top, right? And it's how it's communicated down, and how things play out. So you have the decision-making and structure, then obviously people, work systems, and process, which all make up the most important thing, and that's the culture of your group or your organization. This is a good thing when you're talking about keeping a team. The easiest thing to fall back on when you have an issue within your group or your organization, Claudette just doesn't get it. I don't know. I don't have time to teach her. She doesn't get it. It's a people problem. The easiest thing is to get rid of people. And sometimes that is the right decision to make. But almost always you should look at kind of what you're looking at. If you have lack of coordination, works unfinished, teams are isolated, right? Them, there's a lot of them. They, they don't want to do adoptions that way. When they go out to do events, this is what they do. That's a good indication that you have a lack of coordination. And, where people would say, well, they are the problem, really, it's starting from the top. Who's allowing the siloing? Who's not explaining each other's roles, right? Or how we all fit into this. Excessive conflict. You have people that are blowing up at events, people that are blowing up on each other in the dog kennels or things like that. Again, yeah, it could semi be that, but it's more strongly this, or there's not clear directions for them, right? So one person thinks this is how you clean the dog kennel, and she thinks, no, this is how you clean the dog kennel. And then it's thrown down just like at a hockey game, and they're ready to go because somebody's wrong. It's generally a leadership issue. And you can see in this, you guys, people issue, even though that's the first thing we change in most issues in an organization or in a group, it's usually the, this is the big thing. Gap in skills or misuse resources is really the strongest people issue, but it also could be a leadership issue or a work process and systems. And the reason we go to people, it's the easiest thing to change quickly. I can get rid of them, and then it's gone. But do you guys notice sometimes when you work in organizations where, it's always been, I'm sorry, what's your name? Gabby. Gabby never gets it. Gabby this, Gabby that, Gabby this. So we get rid of Gabby, right? And then she goes away, and oh, thank goodness, Gabby's gone. Everything's going to be perfect now. And then same issue comes with, what's your name? Andrea. And Andrea, and Andrea, and Andrea, oh, Andrea, we got to get rid of Andrea, and we get rid of Andrea. And then it's like, rinse and repeat, right? And the issue is sometimes we're not seeing that we could be a big portion of the issue. Because these guys, you had two great employees potentially that completely got lost in the system, didn't know what they want, they didn't know what was expected of them, and you ended up, and potentially causing Andrea and Gabby, who go to a different organization, do wonderful things, to hate you and post about you on Facebook all of the time and say just how horrible of an organization you are and those kind of things, which can actually work and be a detriment to animals. And it doesn't mean that it's not, it's potentially called for, but at the same time, a lot of people have a problem, and it's because it's easy to get rid of people. So, considering all those wheel components in a culture, your culture really is the backbone of everything that you do as a group or an organization. Okay, performance objectives is just giving feedback, you guys. It's a fancy word for telling people, and most people think of it as when you're doing something wrong, I need to address it, because yes, that is a big portion of it. And we tend to focus on negatives as human beings. If we have a negative experience in something, if we had one negative adoption experience, we want everything around adoptions to turn into that. It just sticks with us more. And so that may be true, and you do need to address things that are issues. You need to address things that aren't issues. It's like dog training, you guys. We want good behavior to continue. So when your staff or your volunteers or you are doing things that are good, reward them. They'll do more good. They'll do more of what we're looking for, and that's performance management too. So for you guys that work in organizations, reviews, important. People really want to know how they're doing. And they obviously hope for the positive feedback, which there's always something positive, even if you don't think there's something positive there, and you definitely should always make sure that you're hitting all of those bases, but it's just good for you to get some kind of value back, and especially volunteers, you guys, especially the people that, the staff members, most of us, we're not getting rich here, but we get a paycheck, so that's nice, right? But it's certainly not, something to go, buy our, cabin home in the Ozarks or anything from. So it's not just about volunteers, but volunteers especially. They'll work their 50-hour work week, and then they're there with you on the weekends. And they want to feel valued. And even if they say they don't, who wants to work for an organization that continue just ignores the value that you're putting into them? Even if it's just a simple thank you, like, oh my gosh, I couldn't be here without you today. And organizations like Austin, Pets Alive, is a perfect example. I mean, you think about Anne and you think about all of these people that do all of this. That's what volunteers can do for you, whether you're a small rescue group or you're APA. I mean, APA is a rescue, that blew up because they had such a great and strong culture around empowering volunteers to help, and those volunteers really did feel that they're turning Austin no-kill. Who doesn't want to be a part of that? And continuing to keep Austin no-kill, because that's what they got into this to do. All right. RACI and project management. This is a big one, you guys, because even, rescue groups, you guys are always, we're always trying to start projects. We want to start new adoption site, or we want to do a gala for the first time. Or organizations, we're going to do, I just learned about barn cat adoptions, and I'm going to go back to my shelter and do a barn cat adoption program. right? Those kind of things. RACI charts, which is a very basic tool, help project team to be more efficient in projects, because you guys, it's like an email that you send to 16 people, and like 15 or 16 of them are like, well, she'll get it, or he'll get it. Nobody really kind of understands, like, who are you asking? Like, what do I need to give you, or what do you need from me, or who's going to take the reins? And sometimes, you know, we just wait for that person to do it. But with RACI charts, it's just good to understand. And I use RACI charts for my staff even in like interview processes, but it's also good when you're building projects, right? Because, so for instance, to give you guys an example, when I hire, so Gabby is my manager, and she's overseeing my dog team. So Gabby is going to be looking, and she's going to interview Andrea for a position within her team, which is obviously overall in my team. So responsible person in this project, we're going to set up how we're going to do the interview. So Gabby is responsible. She's the R because she's the main person who's getting the project outcome. So we need dog kennels clean and dogs ready to be available for adoption by the time that we open. So she's finding people to help her accomplish that task, right? So she's the person that's responsible to do that. She's the person that's going to be the manager. She's going to be overseeing what's happening. Accountable is somebody whose person is ultimately answerable for the proper and complete achievement of the project outcome. No matter what, you know, when people talk about when you have scandals like Roger Goodell, you know, even though maybe he's not the person that was responsible for, you know, this or for that, if you're the main dude or the main gal, you're accountable. So generally that starts from the top, so I would be the accountable. Consulted, so maybe Gabby's going to utilize Claudette, who's the cat manager, to say, hey, you're my colleague, I want to make sure that you feel this is a good team member, I'm going to have you consult with me. So Claudette understands that she's going to give feedback, but she's not the decision maker. And that's good for both of their, because if she really doesn't she doesn't think Andrea's the right fit, but ultimately Gabby goes with Andrea, she can say, Claudette, totally understand. Get you what you're going. I really feel this is the right person. Thank you for your feedback. But still, it's always been communicated ahead of time that what her role is. And informed. So when we hire Andrea, we need to inform the whole team, right? So then that's everybody else. And if you have any question as to who should be informed, they should be informed. There's no reason to not keep people in the dark. All your volunteer legions, if it's really important to them to know who's going to be the next, you know, dog caregiver, if you're a rescue group and it's important that you guys add somebody to your board, or it's important that you guys add somebody to the team. So if there's only 6 or 7 of you, I don't know if you want 6 or 7 people involved in bringing this new volunteer on, but it might be 3 or 4, or 2 or 3, but then the rest will be informed of the entire process as it goes. So everybody at least doesn't feel in the dark. And when you're giving feedback, you guys, be specific, especially when you're giving creative criticism. And don't say things like, well, you're always late, you know, you're always the absolute kind of stuff, because that will turn people off right away. Even if they're late 19 out of 20 times, they're not always, right? They made it once. So therefore, it's not always. It's a lot. It's excessive. Factual. Make sure you back up your facts. The biggest thing that I see a lot, too, is she and I are really close, right? And I wasn't at the adoption event that we were doing, but she's reporting something that happened with her. And before I do, but you 3 were there, right? But if I just hear her point of view, which doesn't mean she's a liar, but she has a certain point of view and maybe doesn't know the whole story, or maybe is upset when she's telling me, so some truths are expanded or things are left out, and then I just act on that when I'm dealing with you, not a good way to go. Get your facts right, because it makes me look dumb, you know? And I've looked dumb many times in this, so learn from me. It's not a fun thing. So you really want to make sure that your facts are straight when you're dealing with any kind of performance issue, and that you're seeing it yourself. You know, broad, ambiguous, vague things, not good, and it's not going to help them. They can't, if you need something changed, give them an example so you can say, this is how you dealt with it, and this is how I want to see you deal with it, right? And it's this instance. Not, you know, well, when you get up and you seem crabby, you know, this, and that, you're not going to get a change, and a lot of times you're just going to, you know, tick them off. And it's not going to be a constructive conversation. Continuing education are good. You guys are here. You got that down, right? But for your new volunteers, for your new people that are coming in, especially if you want to get a different perspective of what you're trying to do, like a value system, like for instance, if I'm trying to get more people to understand open-ended adoptions, instead of me always telling them, I'll send them to things like American Pets Alive, or things like that to help expand that. And for me, too, to expand my knowledge of things that are going on, because what might be true 2 years ago might not be true today. Workshop. Idea exchanges are like little things where people in the community get together and they talk. We have, experts that come in. They're kind of mini conferences. And people enrichment. 5 factors. So there's a study that talks about 5 factors of job design that typically contribute to people's enjoyment of a job. And this goes for volunteers especially, you guys. They want to have task significance. They want to know they're making a difference, right? They want to know what their job is. So it goes out of the job descriptions. Skill variety. I love dogs, but hey, I would love to start getting my toes a little wet in cats. And and it's a whole new world, right? It's scary for a long time, but as you get yourself involved, and it can really help enhance people's buy-in to what you're doing. Feedback, we've talked about. And autonomy. If you have managers, it's again, Gabby is going to have more buy-in for her own job too, because I'm allowing her some responsibility to make her own decisions, which is good, and that's development. And they're going to make mistakes, and you can't hold somebody to the fire and never let them do something for making a mistake, because that's bad leadership. Thank you.